Greetings, Hive Mind, and welcome to this month's Biomass Review, where I share the tips and tricks I tested last month with various forces of the Hive Mind so you can collect biomass too. This is the very first episode, and as with all the content we at Stutterscrub produce, we want to know what you think. So please, let us know if you like this format, what you'd like to see in the future, and how much you love us. First and foremost, I am your host of the Overmind Review, Dustin Hushaw, and while I'm an extremely experienced competitive player from both ITC and WTC formats, this is still an opinion piece, and as such, all the thoughts expressed in this video are simply my opinion. That said, I'm here to help. I want to see other forces of the Hive Mind hit top tables in the competitive scene, so let's get right to it. I've been testing several signature units of mine the past little while, as well as a few new ones I wanted to see how they fit into the 9th edition scene. If you want to hear my thoughts about secondaries and how to take them, one of our recent podcast episodes on Stutterscrub would hear me go into those choices in depth, although in the future I may actually create a Hive Mind specific video for that purpose so I can cite specific units and strategies within. Zoanthropes. 3+ invulnerable save, toughness 4, 45 points a model. They are probably the most durable unit that Tyranids have access to, mainly because of the 3+ invuln, obviously. They also have the benefit of being psychers and a 24-inch smite that gets more mortal wounds if there are 4 or more in the unit. Common way to run them is Leviathan, because within 6 inches of any synapse creature in Leviathan, you are going to be getting a 6-up feel no pain, and since Zoanthropes are synapse, they are generally going to be within 6 inches of themselves, so they will always have a 6-up feel no pain, which makes them even more durable. There are some alternatives to running them. You can run them in Chronos if you want to have the anti-psycher ability to make them cast on 1d6. Now, I don't think it's necessary to have the Zoanthropes of this, but it is necessary to have Chronos in your list if you're going to be running mass Zoanthropes, because you do want to have that denying psychic power of making them cast on 1d6 for things like Death Hex or Null Zone. You don't want your invuln save to be going away, because that is where the durability comes from. So if you're going to be running mass Zoanthropes, you do want to have Chronos in your list somewhere, ideally. Because if you do come against something like Death Hex, you are going to lose your Zoanthropes a lot more easily than you should, and you need them to be durable because that's the main reason they're in your list. Now, a lot of people are going to be talking about, oh, they do so many mortal wounds, it's ridiculous how much damage they output. You're not taking Zoanthropes because of their damage output. That's right, you heard me. You're not taking them for their damage output. Their damage output, in my opinion, is a bonus. It is great. They can do a lot of damage, but you cannot rely on their damage. It is still a psychic power, which means it can be denied. You can still fail it, even with rerolling ones if you have a Nuanced, even rerolling a single psychic fail. If you take that custom Hive Fleet, you will generally fail some of those smites. You cannot rely on them for their damage. They are there specifically to survive, to be on points, to block movement, to do what you need them to do, being bodies on the board. Now this means the most efficient number to run them in, again, my opinion, is 5. Never, ever, ever, and I cannot stress this enough, never run them as 6. I'm sorry. This 6 is too many. Number 1, coherency rule. If you're running 6, you are actually going to cover less ground than if you only have 5, because if you hold 5, they can all be 2 inches apart from each other and not care. Once you hit that 6 number, they have to be within 2 inches of 2 other models. And yes, you'll be able to spread them out once one of them dies, but the problem is you want them spread out from the very beginning. They need to cover as much ground as possible, and I'll talk about why in a little bit as well, because there is more to it than just covering the ground to have more board control. Yes, you get an automatic 3 extra mortal wounds when you smite with them. Now, this is good, but you're already getting a D3 more with 5. So chances are you're not going to get that much more volume out of them. And that's if your smites are going off. If your smites go off, you are going to do, on average, 1 more mortal wound than the average from 4 or 5. Is it really worth giving up coherency and more board control for that extra mortal wound that you might get when you succeed on your smites? To me, no. The other thing is, there are a lot of D3 blast weapons coming out now, like these freaking D3 plasma, the Ridge Runners. There are so many D3 blast weapons that are designed to kill Zoanthropes. You do not want to give them a free 3 shots for every gun that they're firing at them the first time. Your Zoanthropes are more likely to die than 1 round of shooting if you give that 1 extra Zoanthrope. It is imperative that you remember this, because a max when you get to that 6, you are losing the coherency advantage and you are losing the blast advantage for all these plasma weapons, the heavy mining lasers. There are a lot of small like D3 blast weapons that are coming out now that can kill zoanthropes. So you need to keep that separate. You can go as low as 4 as well. I've been testing out both numbers. 3 groups of 4 can also do work because it gives them value in terms of they need to be shot to get rid of that extra mortal wound. So you can get away with 4. It's not a huge deal to lose the 5th one. I do like the 5th one just for both more bodies on the table and the fact that they have to kill 2 in order to get rid of the extra smite. So it's more enticing to your opponent to shoot these durable zoanthropes because they're afraid of the extra D3 mortal wounds as well, even though, again, I feel like it's just a bonus. But the other thing that you want to remember is that they're casting 2 spells as well, as long as there are 4 or more. So being able to cast, if you don't have that much other psychic in your list, that is something to keep in mind when you are running this many zoanthropes, because they can hold the second power, but really you want to try and do extra smites with them instead of casting the secondary power. And sometimes you're going to need those secondary powers, because Tyranids do have some pretty good ones, depending on what you're running in your list. Obviously, Catalyst is a very popular one. You have Paroxysm if you have a lot of melee support, so they're fighting last. Again, can be a big deal. So you want to make sure that you have your psychic powers set up first. So if you're running a list that has a lot of other psychers, then you don't need to worry too much about the secondary psychic power that the zoanthropes are using. Then 4 can be a little bit more efficient for you, so you can use your points elsewhere. However, 3 is just, there's no point. Do not take squads of 3. They don't get the second power. They don't get the extra smite damage. They don't cover as much ground. They're not as durable. They're not worth doing at that point. They're just not. I'm sorry. If you want a 3-man zoanthrope squad, you might as well take a broodlord instead, because you'll get a psychic power and you'll get a good close combat unit for 10 points cheaper. That would be my recommendation with that anyway. Now, the other thing you need to remember with zoanthropes, the other reason I like having at least 5 in a squad, some 4 can do it too, but 5 is better, is that you are able to pick which one in the unit casts the spell, which means a couple things. One, why you always want to have them spread out is because even when they're in close combat, yes, they can't fall back and use psychic powers, but if zoanthropes are always spread out, and with 5 they can cover more ground that way, if your opponent is touching one of your zoanthropes in that squad, another one on the other side can still cast smite. And if you diddle around with the line of sight, so say even if the zoanthropes are tied up, if one of your zoanthropes is stretched out and cannot see the unit that you're tied up with, that means it can't smite it. So it's going to smite the closest visible unit. So if there's terrain in the way, this is why you want to start spreading out your zoanthropes to kind of cover both sides of terrain if you can. So even if you do get charged, you can still kind of manipulate your movement and manipulate where your smites are coming from to hit what you want to hit. That is the other reason that if you're going to take a custom hive fleet with zoanthropes, the cranial channeling is okay, but again, because I don't think you should be relying on the smite as extra damage, I wouldn't take that one, which is the reroll 1 failed psychic power at every turn. I would be more to take the -1 to hit in close combat with if you fly, because zoanthropes fly, so they get -1 to hit in close combat, which is great. And if you're running either venomthropes or malanthrope, that means they're -1 to shoot if they're close by in shooting as well. So they're going to have even more durability in doing that. And then I personally would take the 6-inch pile-in move, which means now not only are they -1 to hit in close combat, because they get an additional 6-inch pile-in move when they are engaged in close combat, you can manipulate your movement if you're spread out, so you can start positioning your smites where you need them, or even the other powers you need to have line of sight for, so you can get where you're needing to be to get these spells off that you want to get off. This is extremely important to master if you're going to start running a lot of zoanthropes. Even one squad of 5, if you want to start practicing with zoanthropes, bring one squad of 5 and put them right up front and try to do this with. It is a very essential skill if you want to use zoanthropes effectively in the competitive scene. They can do a lot of work, but remember, Zoanthropes are not something you want to hide. They are there to take hits. They need to be front and center. They need to be, hey, come shoot us, come fight us in close combat. We are a big threat. If you don't, we will do mortal wounds to you. That's where the bonus comes from. They're not there to do mortal wounds on our side, but they will do mortal wounds. This is how you use the Zoanthropes. I can do more in depth on some of these strategies because Zoanthropes are probably the unit I am the most experienced with. If I'm bringing a competitive list, it is most likely going to have Zoanthropes in it, and it's most likely going to have at least 12, probably 15. I will be testing groups of one group of 5 coming up, as I do feel there might be some play just having the one group of 5 so you have some points elsewhere, because they're not cheap, I'll be honest. However, I feel like they need to be spammed in order to be really effective, but I will be testing that out soon so I can give you an update on that in the days to come. Another thing to remember is that the Zoanthropes, because they have multiple wounds, and they don't care about charging or shooting normally, they are a huge candidate for metabolic overdrives. If you ever need something to get into another corner, if you need to get into a center, if you just need to move them in general, they can move, advance, and move again. With metabolic overdrive, they're unlikely to die from the mortal wounds they potentially could take, and the extra movement can benefit them greatly to get into position to do what you need to do with them. So Zoanthropes are very versatile, even though they don't seem like it at first, but they can be used to great effect for board control, for a little bit of extra damage, tying things up when you don't care about them, and just causing havoc where havoc is due. They are not cheap, so make sure you use them to greatest effect by being very aggressive with them, but not overextending them unless you need to engage on all fronts, or just to move them onto an objective to maybe contest it or steal it. But generally, you only want to do this with a unit that has already suffered enough losses that it's not as effective. So if it's 3 or under, that's when you'd want to do it. Generally, don't do it with the larger squads, because those are when they're still highly efficient. Once they get below that point, then you can start throwing them around the board on objectives into engaging on front ranges or line breaker. They are also infantry, remember, so they can perform actions. This is important to remember. So keep that in mind. They can perform actions, so keeping them alive is great, but you want them to be aggressive enough that your opponent does not want them to be alive anymore. And that will bring us to our Ask the Overmind segment of this episode. Now, every episode, I want to make sure that we have people that are asking any questions they might have for myself about either Tyranid-specific units, specific tactics, because I'm not going to be covering that much in every episode. I want to make sure I'm giving some answers to some of the things that you guys might be wondering currently. So, the first question we have is from Kyle. If you wanted to make Lictors work, what kind of list would you make to fit them in? They are my favorite Tyranid unit, but they have not worked since the days of Lictor's Shame. The ironic part is that Lictors actually have play right now. You don't need to build a list around them because they are infantry, because they innately deep strike. They can perform actions. They can perform any action because they're not characters. They can deep strike to where you need them to be, and now they have the ability to use their stratagem, where if you put something in reserve, you can have them deep strike with the Lictor. They actually have a ton of play because they are a 37-point model that will be able to get you things like line breaker, engage on all fronts, deploy scramblers, teleport homers, whatever you need them to do. So if you bring them with, say, like a 5-man warrior squad or something, and you deep strike the warrior squad with them in the opponent's deployment zone, now you have line breaker because Lictor brought some warriors in with them. So the Lictors actually have a bit of versatility because of their stratagem there, and because they can deny Overwatch when they charge now. So a 37-point Lictor actually does have play. You don't even need to build your lists around them at all. Are they as good as they used to be back when you could bring them in units of 3 and they actually killed shit? No, absolutely not. But they're a versatile unit that can perform actions. So they have a different role now, but they're definitely still effective. I would include them, any standard Tyranid list, I would include at least 1 or 2 for that versatility. Because I'm mixing GSC in my list a lot, I don't generally need them because I have the GSC to do that. But if you're not using them and you're using pure Tyranids, Lictors, to be honest, are an absolute must to have at least 1 in your list to do that with. Next question is from Eddie. For basic troops, which currently do you think is more useful? Hormagaunts, Rippers, or the classic Termagant? Now, I'm assuming because you said basic troops, you're not including Genie Stealers or Warriors in that list. So between the 3, and this is the ironic part, all of them have play, but for different reasons. So point for point, Rippers are the most cost-efficient troop unit that Tyranids have. They are also smaller units, so if you bring 5 of them, they don't need to worry about any kind of coherency rules. They don't give up any blast. They still, now that swarms can still move through breachable terrain and they can go through all that stuff, their movement isn't as limited. They are very amazing units to use with metabolic overdrive because they're not likely to use anything and take a morale check if they're outside of synapse because of it. So they're great for that too. The problem with Rippers is that because of the rise of Primaris and multi-wound models in general, there's going to be a lot of multi-damage weapons running around. And that is where Rippers lose their effectiveness. Because if they get shot with a damage 2 or higher weapon, their efficiency is halved or worse. So because of the rise of the Primaris and all of the multi-wound models that are coming around, those multi-damage weapons are going to becoming a lot more common, which makes Rippers less efficient. And that's where you want to go to something like Termagants or Hormagaunts, because multi-damage weapons they don't give a shit about, especially if you're going to bring them in a custom high fleet when they get the 6-up invuln, which is becoming more and more efficient than running them as Leviathan. Yes, Leviathan will give them the 6-up feel no pain, but running them with the invulnerable is a lot more efficient now because of the high AP weapons and multiple damage weapons that are very, very common in the 41st millennium right now. It means that the 6-up invuln gives you the most value. So between the 3 of them, I always prefer Termagants just because they are cheaper than Hormagaunts, and because I'd likely be running them in a custom hive fleet, I will be giving them the 6-up invuln, and usually I run the 6-inch pile-in, which gives them almost the same efficiency as Hormagaunts get because of their 6-inch pile-in, although obviously they move more and they have a 6-inch consolidate as well. So between the two of Termagants and Hormagaunts, I always prefer Termagants because they're cheaper. Hormagaunts have a bit more play because of their movement and what they can tie up, but because they don't do any real damage and they're not any more durable than a Termagant, I usually don't find them to be quite as effective. That said, they do have play 100%, but now because they're going to get attacked even when they pile into a bunch of things and tie them up, they're not always going to survive that. So if you're going to be running Hormagaunts, it's usually the most efficient way to spam them, like groups of at least like above 20 to 30, because you need those numbers to survive and cause the havoc you need to. If you're doing that, they will cause a lot of problems and they will be able to move block a lot, and that's what Hormagaunts are good at. So if you're going to be doing it more aggressive style or you're trying to war control and aggressively, then Hormagaunts are the way to go. If you're trying to be defensive and just control the objectives you need to at the most efficient cost, you're looking at Termagants. If you're running a list of a lot of multi-wound models, like say Warriors, Zoanthropes, Biovores, all of these elite troops that have multiple wounds, then Rippers are the way to go because they're not going to be the most valuable unit to shoot at. So to answer your question, all of them are effective, but in different scenarios. So pick your poison based on what your list is and go from there. Also keep in mind that Rippers are swarms. They do not have the infantry keyword, so they cannot perform actions, which means that they're not quite as efficient as Termagants or Hormagaunts because performing actions is very important. That said, if they're going to be included in a list with like Warriors and Zoanthropes, maybe Lictors, all these models with multiple wounds that can perform actions, it's not as big of a deal, which is why another reason I'm recommending if you bring in Rippers, you're bringing them in one of those styles of lists. The next question is from Aaron. My question is about having a hammer type unit in your list. It seems to me every other army has a unit that can dish out a ton of damage in CC and be relatively durable, take back an objective in one combat. I feel like Tyrant Guard with enhanced resistance could be that heavy punch, like Terminator's aggressive, etc., but I'm not sure if they could hold up. Dustin, do you think we have a unit that could fit that role, or is that type of unit even necessary? Do we have a unit that could fit that role? Yeah, we do. Is that type of unit even necessary? Yeah, it is. You got to remember, we are Tyranids, so we aren't going to have the same play style as Marines. Yes, Marines and a lot of other armies do have units like that that can do that, and while they are effective for the missions, it doesn't mean you have to have them in order to win those kind of mission styles. So We do have several units that can do that. Ironically, warriors are quite capable of doing that. You only need a 5-man unit with bone swords to get a bunch of attacks. And incidentally, a lot of the things that I've been using with them, I've actually been giving them the adaptation to be able to heroically intervene 6 inches. So that means they can sit on the outside of an objective. Sometimes they can even be in cover or like be blocked in line of sight. So when somebody tries to take it away from you, they will heroically intervene to them and attack them. And they do quite a bit of damage with that when they do that. So the warriors can actually fill that role. They are surprisingly durable. When they're Leviathan, they'll have the 6-up feel no pain. You can adapt them to give them the enhanced resistance of -1, -2 as well, so they ignore a lot of the AP, which can be good. Now, you're asking specifically about Tyrant Guard. I have thought and plotted with Tyrant Guard for a very long time. Like, I have really thought about ways to run them if they could be efficient. The bottom line is they don't do enough damage to fill the role that you're thinking of. They don't have many attacks. They don't do that much damage with their attacks. And while they are durable, the lack of invulnerable save makes them less effective against the mass kind of plasma and bigger guns that are going to be out there. So putting that much, like, the enhancements onto them and putting that many points into them, they are not going to perform the way you need them to in that scenario. We do have some other units that can potentially fill those roles, and generally you want to stay away from monsters in general, just because of the eradicators that are running around now and the incursors, all these things that can tear through them, which means we don't have very much that can actually stand up to like a charge and shooting and still survive and be able to come back and do enough damage. We have to pick one or the other. Now for Tyranids, generally the best option that we have to deal with those kind of situations is to get ready to countercharge, get ready to countersteal enemy objectives. We aren't an army that is very good at staying on an objective and fighting back. We are very good at fighting back, and we are very good at standing on the objective. So when you are looking for a unit that is going to be able to stay on an objective in one combat, you generally want to start spamming either Gaunts on there, because you can cover an objective so they can't even get onto it. And it's not just one 30-man squad, because a 30-man squad can generally get taken down. What you want is layers. So if you have like 3 layers of Gaunts in 3 different squads instead of one 30-man squad, it means you can properly layer them so they have to shoot all of them off and still be able to charge them off to take the objective. If you have them layered properly, it'll be a lot harder for them to focus down all 3 of the units and still be able to make the charge in and kick you off the objective. You can also layer things in front of them. So if you have, say, Gaunts and Zoanthropes, for example, since this is a Zoanthrope episode, you can have the Zoanthropes up front and then have the OBSEC units behind them. So if they are trying to shoot you out, they have to shoot the back unit and not the front unit that is more durable. Then charge in, but you can position Zoanthropes in a way that they aren't able to fully get around them to take the objective. So it's a different way to play with Tyranids, which is actually one of the reasons that I like playing Tyranids and GC they're called, because we can't do traditional meta ways of playing in terms of having a durable unit that can take a hit and then return the hit so they still hold the objective. We have to be a little bit more creative with what we do. And one of the major ways to do that is, as I mentioned, with layers of different kind of units. So they have to appropriately deal with each unit the exact way they need to kick them off the objective. Otherwise, it is going to be your objective. And then we have to be ready to take the objectives away from them afterwards. One of the benefits that Tyranids have is with Metabolic Overdrive and large OBSEC units that are cheap, we can run across the board and start taking away their objectives from them to deny them primary. So even though we may not be able to stay on objectives and still fight back as well, we can kick them off objectives without even having to engage with them a lot of the time. And that's one of the ways we have to play. If you're against that army that will out-sustain you that way, then you need to be prepared to either start stealing away objectives from them they're not protecting properly, or layer up your defenses so they're not able to take you off of your objectives, so you get a different kind of sustainability, and not in terms of just standing there and taking it, but standing there with several units that they have to appropriately deal with in the right order, or they will not take the objective from you. That said, I have been testing out different units that can potentially do the role that you're thinking of. One of them is what I tried near the end of 8th edition with Gene Stealers that have the armored carapace. So they'll have a 4-up save and they're Jormungandr, and then you give them either the enhanced resistance, so they're running around with a 3-up save in the open and ignoring AP 1 and 2, which means if you get hit by a -3, it doesn't matter because you still have a 5-up invuln, and you'll generally have them near Zoanthropes. They're -1 to hit. They're incredibly durable, and with the multi-damage weapons that are out there, they will actually take a lot to get through. So you can also make them Jormungandr to give the 2-up save, but generally I find that the enhanced resistance on them is a lot more effective because they will always have the 3-up, and at the very worst they will have the 5-up. On the 2-up, there's so much AP 1 and 2 out there, you'll lose a lot of the value. Now obviously the downside of that is they are not cheap. To bring them with the armored carapace, they're like 300 plus points. It is very expensive to do that, and you need to bring a full squad of them to do that with. So I'll probably be testing something similar to that in the months to come as well, to see if it's still viable with what's going on. But again, because they're 1 wound models, they actually can bring a little bit more value with all the multiple damage weapons out there and still have an invuln. So that is another one that can do it. They can take a hit and they will punch back really hard, and they are obsec, so you have to kick them off the objective. So they might have some play as well. I'm going to be testing them out. I think the bottom line to answer your question, Aaron, is we do have units that could potentially fill that role, but I don't think it's necessary for us as Tyranid or Gene Stealer players to do it, because we have other ways to fight around that kind of thing. And that is with layering, just getting ready to counter their primary as well. So we can still win the primary game. We don't need to get primary points as long as we deny them primary points as well. Thank you for all of your questions. That will do it for this episode. Please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and really encourages us to produce even more content for you. Leave a comment with your thoughts on this month's review and what you'd like me to do next. Don't forget that I run a podcast with my good friend Jesse called Stud or Scrub, so be sure to check that out. Check out our other videos on YouTube. We are doing battle reports on a regular basis as well. We do a new podcast episode every 2 weeks at the very least. We have more content coming out, like more Overmind episodes as you're seeing here. Check out our Facebook page where all the discussion is happening, and our Patreon page where you can subscribe to us and get some extra bonus content, as well as a Discord channel and easy access to myself and Jesse to discuss this kind of stuff. Until next time, long live the hive mind.